The neighborhood of Willow Creek was the kind of place where lawns were trimmed like golf courses, mailboxes matched the siding of the houses, and no one parked on the street for longer than 5 minutes without getting a warning. It looked straight, out of a real estate brochure. Neat, polished, and a little too perfect. Behind those white fences and matching porch lights was an unspoken code, enforced by the ever-watchful eyes of the Homeowners Association. The HOA in Willow Creek wasn't just a board, it was a lifestyle. Rules covered everything from the shade of your garden mulch to the acceptable number of wind chimes. Any deviation, however minor, was swiftly met with a letter in your mailbox. Some homeowners appreciated the order. Others, well, they knew better than to question it out loud. The unspoken rule? Keep your head down, your hedges even, and your opinions to yourself. So when a moving truck rumbled onto Maple Drive one mild spring morning, it didn't take long for the neighbors to peer through their blinds. The newcomer was a man in his late 30s, tall, quiet, composed. He introduced himself to a couple of folks as Jordan. Not overly chatty, not standoffish either, just calm. The kind of calm that made people curious. Jordan moved into a modest, 2-story home with a wide-open front yard and a bit of overgrown grass that looked like it hadn't seen a mower in weeks. Within days, he got to work, not on repainting the shutters or adjusting the mailbox to regulation height, but on the soil. That's when whispers started. First, it was a few raised garden beds, simple wooden frames he assembled himself. Then came bags of compost, a small irrigation system, and seed packets, tomatoes, basil, zucchini. Each morning, Jordan could be seen kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, quietly tending to the plants like he was coaxing life from the earth one sprout at a time. It was unusual, certainly not in the HOA handbook. Neighbors watched with a mix of interest and concern. The general sentiment was something along the lines of, "Nice guy, but that front yard garden? That won't last long." After all, Willow Creek was not the kind of place where front lawns were meant for anything other than grass. Decorative flowers, maybe. Edible plants? That was pushing it. Still, Jordan didn't seem fazed. He didn't seek approval, nor did he offer an explanation. When asked, he simply smiled and said, "It's something I've always wanted to do." His eyes held a calm assurance that made it hard to argue with him. But beneath that quiet demeanor, there was something else. A sharpness. Like a man who had once lived another life, one with fewer seeds and more stakes. Something told you Jordan hadn't moved to Willow Creek just for peace and quiet. And soon enough, peace and quiet would be the last thing this neighborhood had. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Karen Whitmore had lived in Willow Creek for almost 15 years, and in all that time, no one took the HOA rules more seriously than she did. She wasn't on the board, though not for lack of trying, but that didn't stop her from acting like she was. Clipboard in hand, phone camera always ready, Karen made it her unofficial duty to patrol the neighborhood like a suburban sheriff, sworn to uphold lawn codes and patio furniture guidelines with the intensity of a federal agent. She was in her early 60s, retired, and had an unshakable belief that order was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. Her front porch was lined with identical pots of geraniums, evenly spaced by the inch, and her garbage cans were placed at the curb only during the approved pickup window, not a minute before. Karen didn't just follow the rules, she lived them. So when she spotted Jordan's little vegetable garden sprouting in the front yard across the street, it wasn't just a rule being broken in her eyes. It was an attack on everything she stood for. Tomatoes? In the front? Next to the roses. It wasn't just unconventional, it was offensive. And to Karen, it was personal. At first, she tried to be subtle. if her version of subtle could be called that. She walked her dog past Jordan's house twice as often as usual, slowing down conspicuously to snap photos of the garden beds. She measured, or at least pretended to measure, the distance between the sidewalk and his raised boxes with a small, tape measure she always seemed to have in her cardigan pocket. She even dropped off a printed copy of the HOA's landscaping guidelines in his mailbox, with the section about non-decorative vegetation in front-facing yards highlighted in fluorescent pink. Jordan, for his part, didn't react, not outwardly. He offered her a polite wave when he saw her. Once, he even asked if she'd like some basil once it came in. She declined, of course, with a tight-lipped smile that barely hid the irritation, simmering just beneath the surface. That's when Karen kicked it into high gear. She started keeping a log, a literal handwritten log of every perceived violation. The height of the trellises, the presence of mulch bags on the driveway for more than 24 hours, the compost bin she was sure violated at least 2 city ordinances. She emailed the HOA board 3 times a week, sometimes with photos, sometimes with veiled warnings that if they didn't act, she'd escalate things to the proper authorities. But the board, made up of more laid-back retirees and one overworked accountant who, mostly joined for the free coffee, wasn't eager to start a war over vegetables. They gave vague responses, promised to look into it, and secretly hoped Karen would let it go. Of course, letting things go wasn't Karen's style. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. What most of the neighborhood didn't know, or maybe had forgotten, was that a few years back, Karen had run for the HOA board chair position and lost, narrowly, painfully. And the man who beat her? He'd suggested opening up HOA landscaping rules to allow for personal expression. She never forgave him, or the board. Since then, she'd kept a mental list of offenses, and Jordan's garden? It was the latest and most unforgivable. But there was something else, something she wouldn't say aloud even to herself. Karen felt powerless. In a world that was changing fast, neighbors moving in who didn't look like her, who didn't care about the way things had always been, this garden became her line in the sand. It wasn't just about cucumbers and herbs. It was about control, about keeping Willow Creek the way she remembered it. And Jordan, with his quiet smile and peaceful planting, represented a shift she didn't understand, and didn't want, so she kept watching, kept documenting, kept waiting for the moment when she could finally catch him in an undeniable violation. A fine-worthy, removal-order-worthy violation. Because in Karen's mind, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. And Jordan? Well, he was playing a longer game. One Karen wasn't even aware had already started. The first letter came on a Monday. It was folded neatly, sealed in a white envelope with the HOA's logo printed at the top corner like a stamp of quiet authority. Inside the message was polite, but unmistakably firm. We've received a complaint regarding non-compliant landscaping features in your front yard. Please review HOA guidelines and make the necessary adjustments within 10 days to avoid penalties. Jordan read it without much reaction. He folded the paper back up, placed it in a drawer with a small stack of mail, and returned to his garden without a word. That evening, he adjusted the trellis height by a few inches, just enough to appear cooperative. But the garden stayed. Then came the second letter. This one was less gentle. It cited specific clauses, highlighted phrases like unauthorized, modifications, and potential fines, and made thinly veiled threats of further action. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. Not literally, of course, but the language, the urgency, the detail. It screamed of her obsessive attention to every square inch of Jordan's yard. Still, Jordan made small changes. He painted the garden bed borders a neutral color to match neighborhood aesthetics, even though no such rule truly required it. He relocated his compost bin to the backyard, where it was mostly out of sight. And he even added a few decorative flowers around the base of his tomato plants, a quiet nod to blending in. But the vegetables remained. The core of the garden stayed untouched. Karen, on the other hand, took his non-compliance as a personal affront. She began calling it a war on the rules, and ramped up her efforts. She submitted printed photos to the board in color-coded folders, labeled with timestamps. She annotated them with notes in red ink. Unauthorized planter, non-uniform, edging, soil erosion risk. Where most people would have let it go, Karen doubled down. Soon after, the fines started rolling in. Small ones at first, $25 here, $50 there. Then larger amounts, padded with administrative fees and vague language like continued violation of HOA standards. Karen walked the neighborhood with a new sense of purpose, chin high, convinced she was restoring balance to her world one penalty at a time. The HOA board, for their part, remained largely passive. They weren't blind to Karen's zealotry, but they also didn't want to deal with her wrath. She was relentless, and for the most part, no one else had the energy, or the desire, to challenge her. So they signed off on a few letters, approved a couple of warnings, and let the wheels turn slowly in her direction. After all, they reasoned, Jordan could just move the garden to the backyard. Simple solution, right? But Jordan never raised his voice, never sent an angry email, never stormed into a board meeting. Instead, he responded with polite emails thanking the board for their communication. He made just enough adjustments to look cooperative. Never more, never less. His calm was unsettling. It wasn't resignation. It was something else. Neighbors started to notice. There was something deliberate about the way Jordan moved through all of it. Like someone marking steps, in a dance only he knew the rhythm to. And for Karen, it only added to her frustration. She couldn't get under his skin. No matter how hard she pushed, he stayed steady, unmoved. There was a storm brewing, but only one of them seemed to realize it. And it wasn't Karen. It was around. The third week of spring, when Ellen from 2 houses down finally decided to introduce herself. She was in her early 50s, soft-spoken but sharp, the kind of neighbor who brought cookies on holidays but didn't miss a thing happening on her street. She'd watched the slow escalation between Karen and Jordan with the quiet curiosity of someone who had seen this kind of drama unfold before. One Saturday morning, as Jordan was watering a row of green beans, Ellen strolled over with a gentle smile and a small Tupperware container. "Thought you could use something sweet," she said, handing him a stack of lemon bars. "Figured if you're feeding the neighborhood eventually, I should get in early." Jordan chuckled, accepting the container with genuine gratitude. Well, that's one way to beat the rush. From there, a slow but easy friendship began. Ellen would stop by a few times a week, sometimes with tea, sometimes just for conversation. She never pried, but she asked thoughtful questions, and Jordan, for reasons even he couldn't quite explain, began to open up. It started with small things, where he was from, why he picked Willow Creek, his interest in gardening. But one afternoon, as they sat on his porch and watched the sun dip behind the rooftops, Ellen leaned in just a little and asked, "You ever think about fighting back?" Jordan turned toward her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, a slow, almost mischievous smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I used to fight back for a living," he said. "Litigation, mostly. Corporate law. Then I transitioned into environmental cases, community gardens, water access rights, urban green spaces. Spent the last few years making sure people could grow food on their own land without being harassed for it." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "So, you're not just a guy with a green thumb?" "No," Jordan said, the smile still lingering. "I'm a guy with a lot of documentation, and a very patient approach." She let out a low whistle. "Does Karen have any idea who she's messing with?" "I don't think so," he replied. "And honestly, I prefer it that way." Ellen looked around, lowering her voice. I've lived here a long time. Karen's, well, let's just say this isn't her first campaign. She's gotten people to take down porch swings, repaint homes, even remove a tree once because it was dropping too many leaves. Some people just gave up, moved out. Jordan's jaw tightened ever so slightly. That's a shame. She's not harmless, Ellen added, but she's also not invincible. He nodded slowly, then glanced over at a small security camera mounted discreetly under his eave. Let's just say, I'm documenting everything too. That was the first time Ellen saw a flicker of steel behind Jordan's calm exterior. It wasn't anger. It was something sharper, intentional, controlled. Over the next few days, Jordan continued his gardening as usual. But now, every interaction with Karen, every note slipped into his mailbox, every HOA letter. He kept a copy, made a log, recorded interactions. His calm wasn't the quiet of someone avoiding conflict. It was the calm of someone preparing for it. And Ellen, now fully aware of what simmered beneath the surface, started watching the neighborhood through new eyes. Karen thought she was in control. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. It happened on a Tuesday morning, early, just after sunrise, when the world was quiet and still damp with dew. Most of Willow Creek was just beginning to stir. Coffee machines gurgled to life behind kitchen windows, sprinklers clicked on with rhythmic pulses, and dogs stretched lazily beside their owners' feet. But Karen was already out. She wore a wide sun hat, gardening gloves, and that determined frown she usually reserved for HOA meetings. In one hand, she held a clipboard. In the other, a small measuring tape. The neighborhood had grown used to Karen's walks, but this time. Her steps were less casual. She lingered longer at Jordan's driveway, then turned, deliberately, onto his front yard. Not the sidewalk, not the curb, the yard. She walked straight toward the garden beds like she owned them, crouching, near a row of ripening tomatoes. Her mouth pulled into a disapproving line as she examined the leaves, as if offended by how healthy they looked. Then she leaned over the wooden border, too far, and her elbow clipped a vine. The stem snapped, a plump, nearly ripe tomato tumbled into the soil below, bruised and broken. She paused, as if realizing the misstep. But instead of retreating, Karen scribbled something onto her clipboard and walked off, back toward her house, as if she'd just done her civic duty. What she didn't, no, what she never noticed, was the small black camera tucked beneath Jordan's eaves, angled perfectly toward the yard. It captured everything. Every step, every scribble, every inch she crossed that didn't belong to her. Later that day, Jordan retrieved the footage. He watched it once, without emotion. Then again, slowly. His face didn't change. He simply downloaded the clip, saved it to a labeled folder, and filed a quiet complaint of his own. But Karen didn't stop. The next morning, an envelope arrived, hand-delivered this time. No stamp, no signature. Just an official HOA seal and a thick stack of papers inside. Final notice. Immediate removal required. Failure to comply within 72 hours would result in legal escalation. Karen had finally pushed the board into action, citing non-stop violations and community disruption. To her, it was a victory. She stood on her front porch that afternoon, arms folded across her chest, watching Jordan, like a hawk surveying her prey. The garden had lasted far longer than she'd expected, but now, finally, she would get her quiet, uniform neighborhood back. No more unsightly produce, no more compost bins, just grass and roses and order. But Jordan? He didn't flinch. He didn't storm across the street. He didn't argue with the HOA. He didn't even acknowledge the letter. Instead, he watered his garden with the same measured calm as always, carefully tending to the plants as if nothing had changed. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like denial. But to Ellen, who stood by her mailbox and met his eyes briefly, it looked like something else entirely. Resolve. Later that evening, Jordan walked to his front porch and placed a small yard sign in the grass. It was plain, with black lettering that read simply, "This property is protected by surveillance. Trespassing will be documented and reported." Karen saw it, of course. Her eyes narrowed. She clutched her HOA binder tighter against her chest. For the first time, her smug satisfaction wavered just a little, because while she believed she'd won, deep down, something about Jordan's composure unsettled her. It was too measured, too rehearsed. Like a man holding back not because he was afraid, but because he was waiting, and he wasn't going to wait much longer. The garden still stood. Karen had crossed the line, literally and figuratively. And Jordan? He had everything he needed. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Same HOA seal, same envelope. But this time, it didn't go unopened for long. Jordan had spent the previous few nights working quietly in his study. From the outside, it looked like any other room. Books neatly shelved, a desk lamp casting a warm glow across papers and coffee mugs. But on his screen were legal databases, municipal codes, and case law. Years of litigation experience had taught him how to build a case meticulously, and more importantly, how to make a point that couldn't be ignored. He had no intention of letting Karen bully him out of his garden. Not now, so when the sun rose on Friday morning, the HOA board members each received an envelope of their own, delivered by certified mail, signed for, time-stamped. Inside was a 10-page legal rebuttal that would turn the entire conflict on its head. It wasn't written in the heated, emotional tone they might have expected from someone harassed for weeks. No. Jordan's letter was calm, professional, and razor-sharp. He cited local ordinances that explicitly allowed for front-yard vegetable gardens as long as they didn't obstruct walkways or create health hazards. He included environmental protections, encouraging sustainable home gardening, particularly for low-impact water use and native plantings, both of which his setup exemplified. Then, line by line, he dismantled the HOA's claims. He highlighted the vague language in their own bylaws, calling out phrases like aesthetic disruption as unenforceable without clear definitions. He even referenced 3 recent state-level cases where HOAs were found guilty of overreach in similar circumstances. But Jordan didn't stop there. The second half of the letter shifted tone. It detailed Karen's pattern of behavior, including timestamps of her trespass, photos of her crossing into his property, and a direct quote from her clipboard notes caught on his surveillance camera's audio feed. The tomato plant damage was documented with before and after footage. It was impossible to deny. Then came the final paragraph, a polite but firm warning. If the HOA chose to proceed with legal action, Jordan would countersue for harassment, trespassing, and defamation. He had legal precedent, video evidence, and no shortage of experience in courtrooms. And since HOA board members had allowed Karen to act as a de facto enforcer without oversight, they too could be named in the suit for negligence. The letter ended with one line, bolded and centered. Cease all threats of enforcement immediately, or be prepared to defend them in court. By noon, the ripple effects had begun. Karen was the first to react. She stormed into the HOA's temporary office set up in a spare room at the clubhouse, demanding they stand their ground and put him in his place. But for the first time, her voice didn't inspire the same urgency. The board members had read Jordan's letter. Twice, in some cases. One of them, Dave, normally quiet and compliant, set his folder down and looked Karen in the eye. "You trespassed, Karen. On camera. This isn't a backyard squabble anymore." "But the rules," she started. "The rules don't override the law," another board member cut in. "And frankly, we've let you take this way too far." Karen's face went pale. She wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by the people she thought she controlled. But the damage was done. And it was about to get worse. Later that evening, Jordan uploaded a short clip to the neighborhood forum, a clean, unedited 90-second video of Karen stepping into his yard, damaging his tomato plant, and walking off, like nothing had happened. He didn't add commentary, no text overlays, just the truth, plain and clear. The reaction was swift. Ellen commented first, "This is unacceptable. I warned you, Karen." Then came Bill from across the street. "I don't even like tomatoes, but this is messed up." And soon, the floodgates opened. Neighbors who had once stayed silent, too tired or too wary to get involved, began voicing their support. They shared stories of Karen's past meddling. One man mentioned how she once accused his daughter of violating noise ordinances because she played the violin with her window open. Another neighbor brought up how Karen tried to block them from painting their fence beige instead of approved white. For the first time, people saw Jordan not as the newcomer stirring trouble, but as the guy standing up to the real problem. And Karen? She wasn't just losing the battle, she was losing the neighborhood. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly, like pressure behind a dam. After Jordan's video made its quiet, devastating rounds through the neighborhood forum, the silence was deafening. No responses from Karen. No statements from the HOA board. But behind closed doors, things were shifting. The next scheduled HOA meeting, normally a sleepy affair with weak coffee and stronger gossip, was standing room only. Residents who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up, arms folded, lips pursed, eyes locked on Karen as she walked into the community room like a defendant entering a courtroom. She tried to act unaffected, greeting a few familiar faces, but the usual smiles weren't returned. Even her closest allies on the board looked tense. The damage to her reputation wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, and it was written on every face in the room. The meeting began with a somber tone. Dave, the soft-spoken board secretary, cleared his throat and stood. "Before we begin with tonight's agenda," he said, "we need to address a serious matter brought to our attention." He gestured to a small projector, which began playing Jordan's surveillance footage. No narration, no music, just the quiet click of a clipboard, the crunch of a trespasser's shoes on mulch, and the soft thud of a tomato hitting the soil. No one spoke. When the lights came back on, Dave's voice remained calm. "We've also received written testimonies from 8 residents about previous interactions with Karen, many of which suggest a long-standing pattern of selective enforcement, intimidation, and harassment." Karen stood up suddenly. "This is character assassination. I've done nothing but try to protect the standards of this neighborhood," a few people scoffed. One man muttered, "From tomato plants?" The board called for a closed-door discussion, and the tension thickened. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some trading stories that had never been spoken aloud until now. Stories of letters mysteriously appearing after minor disputes, of complaints that never seemed to stick, unless Karen was behind them. After nearly 45 minutes, the board returned with an official vote. Karen would be removed from all HOA leadership roles, effective immediately, and banned from participating in any future board activities. Her role as the unofficial rule enforcer was over. She protested, of course, claimed it was political, a smear job. But there was no energy left in her voice. The room wasn't with her anymore. The board then issued a short, formal statement. All enforcement actions previously directed at Jordan regarding his garden were being reviewed and effectively suspended. Quietly, with no public apology but clear intent, they retracted the threats. The HOA wasn't looking for another fight. Jordan wasn't at the meeting. He didn't need to be. His case had already been made. In footage, in facts, in the steady support of his neighbors. The garden still stood, and for the first time in a long while, so did the neighborhood's sense of balance. By the time summer rolled around, the garden had transformed. What started as a modest row of tomatoes and herbs had blossomed into something more: vibrant beds of basil, leafy greens, yellow squash, curling along trellises, and bell peppers in every shade of the rainbow. Bees buzzed gently among the blossoms. The air was fragrant with the scent of sun-warmed soil and sweet basil. But it wasn't just the plants that had flourished. The neighborhood, too, felt different. Where once there had been tension, there was curiosity. Where there had been long, quiet avoidance, there were now conversations across hedges. Neighbors, pausing on walks to ask questions, to compliment a bloom, to ask, "How hard is it to grow zucchini, really?" It had started with Mrs. Anders, 2 doors down. She added a single raised bed outside her window. Then the Morgans put in a row of rosemary and mint near their mailbox. Even Bill, who once joked that his thumbs were only good for texting, started, tending a modest plot with cherry tomatoes and jalapenos. Jordan never pushed. He didn't need to. He simply kept planting, watering, harvesting, always with that quiet patience that had first unsettled Karen. But now, it inspired people. His garden didn't scream for attention. It invited it. Karen, for her part, was gone. The house across the street sat empty for a few weeks, then quietly changed hands. A "for sale" sign had appeared suddenly one morning and disappeared just as quickly. No farewell, no confrontation. Just a clean exit. Someone said she moved to a condo across town, someplace with stricter rules, apparently. No one asked for details. In her place came a young couple with 2 kids and a big goofy Labrador that liked to nap on the front porch. The difference was felt immediately. The kids brought laughter, the dog brought energy, and the couple, well, they brought a compost bin and a seed catalog. Jordan helped them pick out soil. Months passed. The season shifted. And as summer reached its peak, the once contentious corner of Willow Creek looked more like a community than it ever had. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and bathed the garden in golden light, Jordan stood beside his tomatoes, basket in hand. Ellen strolled by, waving, as her own lavender plants swayed gently in the breeze. He walked toward his fence line where a newer neighbor, a quiet man named Eric, stood admiring the peppers. "You ever try one of these?" Jordan asked, pulling a ripe bell pepper from the plant. "Sweet, not spicy." Eric smiled, shaking his head. "Not yet. Still figuring out what won't die on me." Jordan laughed, offering the pepper along with a bundle of fresh basil. "Sometimes the best revenge," he said with a wry smile, "is just growing something good." Eric chuckled, taking the vegetables like a gift, which they were. "You're not wrong." And with that, Jordan returned to his garden, dirt on his hands, the hum of bees nearby, the sound of children playing down the block. No drama, no threats. Just life, growing slowly and surely under the same sun that once beat down on bitter conflict. Now it warmed a neighborhood that had finally remembered what it meant to belong to each other. And the garden? It kept growing. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.